Yeah, I don't know. Austin said he's like, I've had hernia done two or three times.
Right.
I don't know if I'm tough enough to go through this ever again.
My dad, it was never hernia, but he could look at something and crack a rib. And they just got so brittle from all the times he'd broken his ribs that like one day we were working on something and he lifted a 10-speed bike into the back of the trailer and cracked 3 ribs. And he'd sit there for a week, just, I mean, so bad.
Yeah. You don't realize how much you use your stomach
Right.
for everything.
It don't matter what hurts, that's what you use.
Yep.
Which finger or what. So,
All right. Well, let's begin. So, remember that last time on Sunday we talked about the anointing of Aaron as the priest, the high priest, and his sons as priests. And we kind of closed it off with they were to stay by the tent. They were to stay at the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days as part of their anointing. And so now in chapter 9, we're at the 8th day. So this is the day after they have finished their 7 days.
woo, but they're happy they can leave there.
So on the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons, the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a bull calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. Okay. And then say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering and a calf and a lamb, both a year old without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a peace offering to sacrifice before the Lord. Okay. So we have 2 sets of sacrifices here. Aaron is to bring for himself a bull calf. Okay. And a ram and a male goat. Okay.
Yeah.
To the Lord, to offer sacrifice for himself. And then the people are to take a male goat, a calf, a lamb, and these other things for a sacrifice for the people. Now later, this will be the habit of the Day of Atonement, but the idea is first Aaron must provide sacrifice for his own sin.
So that he's able to do the sin
So he's able to do the sin offering for the people. Okay.
Because if he has sin, if he doesn't do that, it doesn't make no, doesn't matter.
Right.
So does each family have to do a sacrifice?
So it doesn't say it says, say to the people of Israel, take a male. So probably in this case, we're talking about the congregation together gathers this amount. Like I said, much like the Day of Atonement. Okay. So, a male goat for sin. This is for the people, a male goat for the sin offering, a calf and a lamb, both a year old, for a burnt offering, an ox and a ram for a peace offering, a grain offering with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you. Okay. So they brought what Moses commanded in front of the tent of meeting. And all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. Okay. So this day is a special assembly.
Because they just anointed.
Right. So the idea here is that they are doing a special assembly together of all the people to provide these sacrifices of anointing. And what this would be Aaron's first official day as high priest. Okay. So Moses said, verse 6, this is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you. Then Moses said to Aaron, draw near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, and bring the offering of the people and make atonement for them as the Lord has commanded. Okay. So Aaron draws near to the altar, kills the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. Notice, this is his own personal sin offering.
Do his sons have to do their own personal too? Or does this cover?
This is
Aaron
him
and-
and his sons is
So
in this
it
situation.
covers his whole
Yes.
family.
Okay. Now, there is but understand, in a way, it's not so much the whole family discussion. It is this.
The priest.
He is the high priest.
So it
It
covers
is his job. Well, but we're talking about a specific period. And like I said, we don't know that this is the day of that, but this is certainly much the same practice as what we have later in the Day of Atonement.
So
okay.
it looks like, so it's probably like the first official.
And it may not be the right day, but it's kind of the idea. So notice what he's dealing with is not, or for the people, it is not for individual sin.
No.
It is for national sin.
Oh, which is why Aaron is the only one that has to sacrifice because it
So-
covers all the priests.
Well, no, it's not so much that. It's Aaron must be pure because he is the only one who does this.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, so the.
He is the
second
priest,
get to do
right.
this
He is
soon.
the priest offering this sacrifice. And so because it is the most later, because it is the sacrifice for the entire people, he must make sure that he is clean and covered before he does it. Okay. Now later, when we get to the Day of Atonement, he actually goes in and puts the blood on the incense altar and on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And so he must be clean in order to do that, or he dies.
Yeah,
He actually goes into the presence of the Lord. And by the way, that is part of this as well, although it's done a little different. So it says so he killed the calf. His sons presented to him the blood of the offering, because that would have been their job.
okay,
He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar. Okay, so remember, there's a horn on each corner of the altar of sacrifice, and he puts blood on each of the horns.
gotcha.
Okay. So, and then he pours the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. But the fat of the kidneys and the long lobe of the liver from the sin offering, he burned on the altar as the Lord had commanded Moses. The flesh and the skin he burned up with fire outside the camp. It is the exact pronouncement of what the sin offering was supposed to be.
Gotcha.
Okay. You burned these parts on the altar, but the rest of it you took outside the camp into a place that was ceremonially clean,
At birth.
and it burned it outside the camp. Okay. So then he kills the burnt offering. This is once again for himself.
Which would have been the ram.
Aaron's sons hand him the blood, and he threw it against the sides of the altar. And they handed the burnt offering to him piece by piece and the head, and he burned them on the altar. Okay. And he washed the entrails and the legs and burnt them with the burnt offering on the altar. Okay. So once again, we have Aaron going through a process that has been prescribed for each of these offerings.
Gotcha.
Okay. So then it goes on. It says, then he presented the people's offering and took the goat of the sin offering that was for the people and killed it and offered it as a sin offering like the first one. He presented the burnt offering and offered it according to the rule. And he presented the grain offering, took a handful of it and burned it on the altar, besides the burnt offering of the morning. Okay. So after he has completed his own sin offering, then he is able to present for the people.
I got a question,
Okay,
and I know it doesn't tell us this, but maybe you'll have an idea. So when he's doing his sin offering and it says that you gotta take the body outside to outside the camp to a whole
clean place.
Does he do that before he even sacrifices?
It's not clear.
Or do they just pile the bodies up and then they take it out later?
It's not clear. If I was making a wild guess,
Yeah,
I would say probably as he's doing it. However, part of the discussion is, and so this is the other side of that, that may mean it's the other way, is that he's to take off his priestly garments and
when
do
he
that.
goes to do that,
Okay,
which is what makes me think he
right.
would do that last.
So we don't know the order, but what we know is, and remember that this is the important element of it. No one is to eat any of the leftovers of the sin offering.
Aren't you not supposed to eat any of the sin offering anyway?
Right. That's the whole point.
Okay.
That's the whole point.
Okay.
You are not to eat the sin offering. So remember, so think about this idea. This is a bull calf. Okay, so what, 500, 600
Yeah.
pounds maybe?
That's a lot.
Okay, I don't know, what's a full grown bull?
Yeah.
So maybe, 300-400 pounds. It's a lot of meat.
Yeah,
And basically, notice what it says. You've slaughtered the animal. You've collected its blood. You have taken a specific set of internal organs.
yeah,
You've burned them on the altar, and sitting there is a dressed calf. And, if we were using today's dollars, a couple $1,000s worth of meat,
yeah.
and you take it outside the camp and burn it up. Why? Because it is made for the sin of the people, and therefore it is not clean to eat, because it is an offering made for sin. Sin costs you something.
Something.
Okay, then the burnt offering is also burned completely, but it's done on the altar. It's done on the altar
Instead of
outside the camp, because it's not for sin, it's part of worship.
Yeah,
Okay. Now, so for the people, then we have a sin offering as well for their sin.
also.
Then we have a burnt offering for worship.
Worship.
And then it also brings up a peace offering. Now, a peace offering is not burned up.
That's the grain offering, right?
Well, the grain offering is part of the burnt offering. But a grain offering is not completely burnt up.
That's only a handful.
It's only a handful. Okay, the ox and the ram in verse 18 are the peace offerings.
Okay.
A peace offering, you burn certain pieces, and then the rest is used for
Fellowship with.
fellowship with the Lord.
That's where they picnic with
Mhm.
God.
Okay. Now, clearly there was not a huge picnic on this, because there wasn't enough meat for 3 million people.
No,
However, an ox is a big animal too.
yeah,
Okay. So he kills the ox and the ram, the sacrifice of the peace offering to the people. Aaron's sons handed him the blood. He threw it against the sides of the altar. But the fat pieces of the ox and of the ram, the tail, or the fat that covers the tail, and that which covers the entrails and the kidneys and the long lobe of the liver, they put the fat pieces on the breasts, and he burned the fat pieces on the altar. But the breasts and the right thigh, Aaron waved for a wave offering before the Lord, as Moses commanded. Now remember how this works.
that's fair.
In a peace offering, you would slaughter the animal, you would dress it, you would take off the breast, or as we talked about, the brisket, or that
The chest
front,
part.
the chest. And you would take the fat, and it says you took and set the fat on top of it so that it was part of that. And then you would take the fat pieces, because God said all the fat belongs to the Lord.
Oh, and
So-
that's why they put it on the chest, so that it's.
So
Part of
the
that.
fat pieces belong to the Lord. Those they burn up.
Yeah.
But the breast
Goes to
and the
priest.
thigh are waved before the Lord and then become the priest's portion for them to eat.
Got you.
Okay. So, once again, as Moses had commanded, and that's an important element of this. Then Aaron lifted up his hands towards the people and blessed them. And he came down from offering the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offering. And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. So they go into the tabernacle. And when they came out and they blessed the people. Okay. And then here comes the discussion of the accepting. The glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. So when you see this phrase, okay, the glory of the Lord appeared, it means that God appeared and we don't know exactly, but remember, there's a lot of discussion about this, but God himself appeared before them. Not in a way that they would die, but his glory appeared before them. So God made an appearance. And then fire comes out before the Lord. So it's almost as if, and understand how this works, that when they open the main door to the tabernacle to come out, God's glorious presence is between them, and fire comes from his presence. And remember that the idea of the burnt offering, and we talked about this before, that you would take the evening burnt offerings, would stay on the coals all night until they were burned up. So just because they were already on the fire doesn't mean they were still there. They were cooking. Now they would cook their way all the way to ash, but at this point they are still cooking, but God's glory comes out and fire comes from his presence and completely takes them away and instantaneously reduces them to ash.
That would be awesome to see.
Okay. So they shouted and fell on their face.
Would you?
Okay.
That would be awesome.
Now, there is an interesting discussion here that we need to make sure we understand. Okay. As we move into chapter 10. Verse 24 says that fire came out from before the Lord. In a few verses, we are going to find the same phrase in a completely different context. Okay. The first one is when you are doing what God tells you and you are honoring God, then his presence will come and show himself. The second one is when you are disobedient to God. When God shows up, he is still glorified, but it may be at your peril. Okay. So now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron. These are the two oldest boys of Aaron. They each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord. Now, this is one of these things where we have to take a moment and deal with. There are about 1 million different ideas as to what actually happens here. Okay. I will give you one that we may be wrong, but this is the idea. It appears, based on what it tells us later in this passage as we see it, that two things goes on. The first one is that Nadab and Abihu are intoxicated. They're drunk.
Which is why they use their own fire pan.
Well,
the right one.
It's not their own fire pan. It's their own mixture. Okay. So we don't know that for sure. The reason I say that is because later in chapter 10, it will say, make sure that you don't come before the Lord intoxicated.
Yeah.
Okay. So we do not know for sure that that is what happened, but that is certainly something that becomes as a command out of this. Okay. So, verse 8 it says, drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. Okay. So we don't know for sure, but that's certainly a part of this. The thing that we do know is this: they offered something that was not according to the directions that God gave them. Now, we don't know if that means they offered it at the wrong time. They offered it in the wrong way. Some will say that they went in and took incense that would have been used in Egyptian worship and added it to the mixture. Okay. There are several options as to what is going on. However, the idea is they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord. Okay. Now, we're talking incense. Okay. Clearly, that's the discussion. So remember that God had said, here is the formula for the incense. Here's how you do it. Don't use this formula for anything else.
Yeah.
Okay. The King James calls it strange fire. Okay. They chose to worship God in a way that was different than how God demanded they worship. Now watch. And fire came out from before the Lord. It's the exact same phrase. Fire came out from before the Lord and consumed. Okay.
Yep.
Look at verse 24 of chapter 9. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of the fat on the altar. Then verse 2, chapter 10. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said. Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified, and before all the people, I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Now, let's make sure we understand this idea. And by the way, we'll get into it even a little bit more. Why did Nadab and Abihu have to die?
Because they disobeyed, and they're supposed to be set apart. They're part of the priesthood.
But guess what? Not every priest who disobeys is struck dead. Okay, so we will find several places in Scripture where God sets an example.
Yeah, but aren't these like the first priests?
Mm-hmm.
This is like the first.
So this is the
like, okay, you're gonna mess around. This is what's gonna happen.
Okay.
So don't mess around.
Later, we have also a story where a group of people open the Ark of the Covenant and God strikes a bunch of them dead. Then we have the story of Uzzah, who David sent to take care of the Ark of the Covenant when they were bringing it back to Israel, or back to Jerusalem. By the way, they were carrying the Ark in the wrong way. The ox stumbled. Uzzah thought the Ark was going to fall out of the wagon, so he grabbed it and God struck him dead. Okay.
It wasn't supposed to be in a cart.
It wasn't supposed to be in a cart in the first place.
It was supposed to be on
okay.
poles.
So then later in the New Testament, the story of Ananias and Sapphira fit into the same thing. Okay. They come before God and they say, well, we've brought you everything that we sold this piece of property for. And they're making a big deal out of it. And Peter goes, really? Is that all you sold it for? Oh, yeah, no problem. He goes,
they're totally lying.
They're lying. And God strikes both of them dead. Okay, so what is the point? Well, the point is what the Lord says to Moses. This is what the Lord has said. Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified. So, among those who come near to me, I will be set apart, which means I will be obeyed. I will be treated as something special. So by the way, this comes back to what did they do? They treated God as common. They treated the job of worshiping God as common and as not worthy of doing well. Okay. And before all the people, I will be glorified. So by the way, if you are a priest, you will make sure that you show God proper respect among the people. Okay. So Moses calls to Mishael and Elephon, the sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them. So he calls to two cousins of Aaron. And he says to them, come near, carry your brothers away from the front of the sanctuary and out of the camp. Okay. Now, that part is pretty clear. Okay. He gets a group of people who are related to Nadab and Abihu. They would have been cousins, and has them carry them outside of the camp and bury them. Okay. Now, here comes the hard part. So, verse 5 goes on and says, so they came near and carried them in their coats out of the camp as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and to Ithamar, his sons, do not let the hair of your heads hang loose. Do not tear your clothes, lest you die. So, what is he saying?
Don't mourn.
Do not show the signs of mourning for their death. Now, think about the request here. I want to make sure we understand the request. You are telling a man who just lost his two oldest sons, show no signs of mourning for them.
That'd be tough.
Now, it goes on, lest you die and wrath come upon all the congregation. Okay. But let your brothers, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning that the Lord has kindled. So let everyone else in Israel mourn their death, but you do not. And do not leave the tent of meeting, lest you die. You stay here and do your job. Why would God do this? Because to wail over God's judgment, for the priest to wail over God's judgment would mean that the priest is saying, I don't believe God should have done it. They sinned. They received the punishment for their sin. And God is saying, they got what they deserve, and you need to be faithful to me. You're anointed by me. And it says, and they did according to the word of Moses. Okay. Then verse 8, and the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or strong drink, you or your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, lest you die. So let's go ahead and deal with this.
Get drunk, don't
It
drink.
does not say you're never to have any alcohol.
No.
It says, make sure that you're sober when you show up to offer sacrifices to me. Okay. It will be a statute forever throughout your generations. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean.
And how can you do that if you're inebriated and you're not thinking clearly?
Well, and also,
Sober, I could actually say that's the truth.
but understand, the idea is you are to be set apart.
Yes.
And you are not to treat God lightly. Okay. So you cannot do the job that I have given you to do if you are inebriated.
Yeah.
You're to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them by Moses. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, to Eleazar, and to Ithamar, his surviving sons. Take the grain offering that is left of the food offerings and eat it unleavened beside the altar, for it is most holy. You shall eat it in a holy place, because it is your due and your son's due from the Lord's food offering, for so I am commanded. Okay. Now, there is, okay, it's going to come to that. So, but the breast that is waved and the thigh that is contributed, you shall eat in a clean place. So watch. The grain offering
Is only for the priest.
Well, but here's the idea. The grain offering that is left of the Lord's food offering. So remember that they burned a memorial portion. The remainder of that bread is only to be eaten inside the tabernacle or inside the courtyard. What?
Which is why the daughters can't eat it. Because in
Right.
14 it says, but you and your sons and your daughters may eat the breast. The presentation.
Okay. You may eat it in a holy place.
Yeah, which is inside the tabernacle.
Okay. Then the breast and the thigh can be eaten anywhere that is clean. And it can go to all of your family. Okay. For they are given as your due and your sons' due from the sacrifices of the peace offerings of the people of Israel. The thigh that is contributed and the breast that is waved, they shall bring with the food offering of the fat pieces to wave for a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be yours and your sons with you as a due forever, as the Lord has commanded. Now Moses diligently inquired about the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it was burned up. Okay. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the surviving sons of Aaron, saying, why have you not eaten? And apparently, I did not think this was the case, but clearly this is the idea. There is a portion of the sin offering that is given to the priests. Okay,
As
just
like as their food.
Okay. And so what they had done is they had just went ahead and let it burn up. Now, we don't know whether that was a mistake or whether that was them not eating because of the death of their brothers.
Gotcha.
Okay. So Moses comes to them and says, why have you not eaten the sin offering in the place of the sanctuary, since it is a thing most holy and has been given to you that you may bear the iniquity of the congregation to make atonement for them before the Lord? Behold, its blood was not brought into the inner part of the sanctuary. You certainly ought to have eaten it in the sanctuary as I commanded. Okay. So, and Aaron said to Moses, so notice, and this is a part of this, none of it was brought into the actual building of the sanctuary. And that is the discussion that comes in, that if it is brought into the altar of incense or before the Ark of the Covenant, it is not to be eaten at all.
Gotcha.
Okay. So Moses rebukes Aaron's sons for not eating this piece.
Yeah.
So then Aaron comes to Moses and says, behold, today they have offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. And yet such things as these has happened to me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would the Lord have approved? So what does he mean? What he means is we offered the sacrifices we were supposed to, and still my children died. And in a way, he's saying, because I failed to instruct them. And so do you really think God would have been happy if I ate of the sin offering?
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. And so when Moses heard that, he approved. Okay. So the priests are now ordained. They have started their ministry, and we've had the death of 2 of them for not doing what they were supposed to. Okay. That kind of concludes the tabernacle discussion. Now, we are going to go through chapter 11, just because it has been a fairly cognizant thing throughout all of this, because chapter 11 is the chapter that really goes into detail about what animals are clean and what animals are unclean. Okay, we will go through that. If we get done with 11, we'll stop there for tonight, and there'll probably be some skip before we go to the next one. We probably won't pick up directly at chapter 12. Okay. So the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth." Okay. Whatever parts the hoof and is cloven footed and chews the cud among the animals you may eat. Okay, so we've talked somewhat at length about this. Have to have a cloven hoof. Okay. Have to have a hoof, number 1. It has to be a split hoof. Okay. So like a cow has
Like a cow.
2 hooves on each foot.
Yeah,
A horse does not.
no. it's
A horse has
solid.
1 solid hoof.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does, but it doesn't chew the cud.
A deer, what?
A pig has cloven hoof, but does
Okay.
not chew the
So
cud.
we're going to go on. Okay. So you may eat those animals. So nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, you shall not eat these. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the rock badger, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the hare or rabbit, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you.
Is a rock badger the same as the Hyraxes? Because mine doesn't say rock badger, it says Hyraxes.
I don't know, but mine just says rock badger.
Okay.
But some kind of an animal. Okay.
Gotcha.
The pig, because it parts the hoof and is cloven footed but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Okay. You shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. Okay. So we have the set of standards here. A cloven hoof. Okay. And chewing the cud. And it is because all the examples he gives fits one of them, but not the other.
Yeah.
Okay. So these you may eat of all that are in the waters. Now we're talking about fish. Everything in the water that has fins or scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, you may eat. Okay. But anything in the seas or the rivers that does not have fin or scale, of the swarming creatures in the water and of the living creatures that are in the waters, is detestable to you. You shall regard them as detestable, and you shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcasses. Everything in the water that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. Okay, so here's kind of the idea. You can eat most of the fish varieties. Okay.
No whales or porpoises or
No,
dolphins.
but
none of
yeah,
that.
no sea mammals.
No sea urchins or starfish.
So no shellfish of any kind.
Of any kind.
Simply fish. Okay. And these things you shall detest among the birds. Okay, they shall not be eaten. They are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, the raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and then I think it's funny, the bat is included in the birds.
Because he flies.
Because he flies. Okay.
That's our birds, aren't
No,
they?
they're not. They're mammals.
Oh. I totally thought they were.
The bat is a flying mammal. It's
But-
not a bird,
Okay.
but it is a winged animal.
Okay, got you.
Okay. So now let's deal with what it's saying. What is the common element of every one of these?
Well, all of them except for maybe the ostrich, I think, eat meat.
Uh-huh.
Or omnivores will eat anything. I
Uh-huh.
think our ostrich is that way too.
Fly?
I would assume so. What?
Do they fly?
Well, no, the ostrich doesn't fly.
Well, the ostrich didn't, but
So in basically what we're talking about is they are limited to a specific set of birds that only eat grain and insects.
Yeah.
No fish either, because you have the heron, the
Yeah.
seagull,
Big all they all eat fish.
they eat fish.
Any kind of meat eating animal.
Mhm.
Bird, I mean.
Now, the ostrich was interesting to me, but
I
I,
thought that was interesting.
but-
too.
anyway, it's still kind of the same idea. Mainly, it's nothing that eats dead bodies.
So. Would that mean their eggs are not good either?
On those particular animals, yes.
Okay.
Now watch.
Ostrich egg, that's like
Here's the
huge
fun part of that. So an eagle or a vulture or a falcon might eat an unclean animal.
Yeah, that's true.
So that,
Mhm.
That's
but
what
an
makes
ostrich
it-
would too then.
Right. I would assume. I don't know. I haven't looked to see what the diet of an ostrich is.
I'm kind of curious. 'cause
I'm gonna
that
take a
would
moment.
throws me off. Why is
It would eat,
that?
now you would think it would eat grain. It would be a grain fed.
You would think. And could you imagine an ostrich leg? All those.
They're
things are
huge.
big,
They're good
like
too.
Giant turkey legs.
So there we go. They primarily eat plants, but they eat insects, snakes, lizards, and rodents.
Ah,
There
there
you
you go. That's why.
By the way, there is no lizard that is clean.
No iguanas, no nothing.
So
like
that's
that.
why there's,
Mhm. So, no, alligator's really good.
Always wanted to try alligator, and I really want to try snake.
So, all winged insects that go on all fours are detestable to you. Okay. Yet, among the winged insects that go on all fours, you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet with which to hop on the ground. Of them, you may eat the locust, the cricket, the grasshopper. Now, I think it's funny, and I'll say this. It says that go on all fours. Well, all insects have 6 legs.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, but the idea is understand that a grasshopper has a very specific body type as opposed to every other insect. They have the 2 long legs that
Yeah.
come over their back. It is only those type of insects
that you could eat.
that you can eat.
So no grubs, no, none of that other stuff.
Okay,
Not that I would eat a grub, but.
right. Okay, so verse 24, and by these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches their carcass will be unclean until the evening, and whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every animal that parts the hoof and is not cloven footed or does not chew the cud is unclean to you. Okay, everyone who touches them shall be unclean, and all that walk on their paws among the animals that go on all fours are unclean to you.
Like dogs and
Cat
cats,
and
dogs, bears.
okay, so paw is the thing here.
Dogs not clean?
No,
We don't hunt there. Some people eat dogs.
well, Chinese,
There are people that eat dogs and rats.
China eat dog meat, probably. And let's be completely fair. If you have that many people, you probably eat whatever meat you can get.
Yeah.
But the Jews could not eat dog is kind of the point. Okay, so whoever touches their carcass will be unclean till evening, and he who carries their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. And these are unclean to you among the swarming things that swarm on the ground: the mole rat, the mouse, the great lizard of any kind, the gecko, the monitor, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. They are unclean to you among all that swarm. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. And anything on which any of them fall when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood or a garment or a skin or a sack, any article that is used for any purpose. It must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, then it shall be clean. And if any of them falls into any earthenware vessel, all that is in it shall be unclean, and you shall break it. Any food in it that could be eaten, on which water comes, shall be unclean. And all drink that could be drunk from every such vessel shall be unclean. Now, this one just makes sense. If a mouse or something falls into your food, you don't eat it.
Yeah, that's just common sense.
Okay. But now I did think this was interesting because it really, it is clear in the way this is said how this works, but it is not often how we think of it. Each of these animals, notice what it is unclean to touch.
Everything.
They're dead. So you could touch a living pig and you would not be unclean. You could not touch a dead pig.
Well, I guess that makes sense because you gotta move them. You can't, you gotta do something with them.
Oh, if you slaughter a pig,
Then you're unclean.
you're unclean.
Why would you slaughter? a
If
pig
you
if
touch
knew
it, so this is the idea, right? So, but for the Jews, that would have been detestable.
Yeah.
So the idea here is, and notice it's very clear, it is not the living animal that you can't touch. It's you can't touch the dead animal, which you said slaughtering. If you slaughter it, you've touched its corpse.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just probably good practice to not touch any dead thing. Not like I listen to my own practice, but I like to play with dead stuff sometimes.
But okay, so it goes on. They are unclean. Okay, so all drink be unclean. Everything on which any part of their carcass falls shall be unclean, whether oven or stove, it shall be broken into pieces. They are unclean and shall remain unclean for you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern holding water shall be clean, but whoever touches a carcass in them shall be unclean. So if you have a mouse fall into a big cistern of water that the water is not completely gone, you have to get the body out and then you're unclean till evening. Okay, and if any part of their carcass falls upon any seed grain that is to be sown, it's clean, because you're not eating the seed.
You're eating the plant.
You're eating the plant after it's been planted. But if water is put on the seed and any part of the carcass falls on it, they're unclean to you. Okay.
So if you've already sowed it into the ground and added water for the first time and then it falls on it.
Well, in some ways, he is actually discussing good practice because bacteria does not transfer nearly as easily in a dry medium. Usually water is involved. As much as we joke around about the 5-second rule, if it falls on a wet piece of, it's done. Don't touch. If it's dry, then that really does kind of, the bacteria just doesn't
Okay,
transfer that fast.
okay.
Okay, so if any animal which you may eat dies, okay, whoever touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening, and whoever eats its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And whoever carries the carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Okay, now the idea here is if it dies of natural causes, you become unclean when you touch it
Or eat it.
or eat it. Okay.
So
Ev-
basically, any dead thing, you
Yeah.
become unclean.
Then verse 41, every swarming thing that swarms on the ground is detestable. It shall not be eaten. Whatever goes on its belly and whatever goes on all fours and whatever has many feet, any swarming thing that swarms on the ground, you shall not eat, for they are detestable. You shall not make yourselves detestable with any swarming thing that swarms, and you shall not defile yourself with them and become unclean through them. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourself with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground, for I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law about beasts and birds and every living creature that moves through the waters and every creature that swarms on the ground, to make a distinction between the clean and the unclean, between the living creatures that may be eaten and the living creatures that may not be eaten.
It's weird for me to hear them say they call the mice and stuff like that a swarm. Because when I think of a swarm, I think of like a swarm of locusts or a swarm of crickets or grasshoppers. You don't think of mice swarming.
Oh, yes, you
All
do.
things-
If you've ever been in a place that has a large infestation of mice, yes, you do.
Well, I've seen it like on nature shows, like in Australia, where they have like the whole ground is covered with mice and big, huge swarms of mice. And it's like, which is why I'll never live in Australia,
But remember though, that what we're talking about is a difference in movement. It's not necessarily numbers. Okay. The clean animals are basically vegetarian grass-fed animals.
yeah.
Okay, they graze. A mouse moves all over looking for food. It
Oh, that's what they mean by
swarms.
swarm, by their erratic movement.
Same thing as a cockroach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the first thing I think of when they talk
So-
about the bugs and the.
So one cockroach
Yeah.
has a specific way it moves.
Yeah,
Same thing is true with mice. Okay, if you have one mouse, it just scurries.
scourge.
But the truth of the matter is, if you have lots of mice, it is like a swarm.
And I've seen lots of
Mhm.
cockroaches, they do swoop.
Right.
And like, when you turn on the light, they. Oh,
So, like I said, we are, I don't know how far we will skip. I've got to go in and look, but chapter 12 begins the purification laws after childbirth. And some of that we don't really need to go over. So we'll do a little bit of skipping next time. I would encourage you to read them. It is interesting reading, but we're going to take a little bit of break between that and we may very quickly step into chapter 13. We will not go through all of it just because, oh my gosh, it's so detailed. But we may talk just a bit about the discussion of leprosy, but we won't go through that whole chapter.
They talk about the leprosy on the wall or the fungal
Yeah.
stuff on the walls. How they
We may spend a little bit of time in verse 14, in chapter 14, the cleansing houses.
Yeah.
We probably won't do the laws about bodily discharges.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
please.
so,
I look at all that going to sleep. Batteries.
But just because some of that is a lot of fun. and not really something we need to get into a lot. But we will stop there for now. And we will pick up, we'll kind of glaze through 13 and then probably start again in earnest at 16
Okay.
would be my guess.
When is your mama coming home?
Hopefully next Friday.
Miss her so
I know.
much.
I miss her too.
Awesome. Yeah,
I-
I miss her so much, man. It's like, it's so weird going out to walk Duke and Ginger